Australia is pushing back the power of social media giants. The battle over who can watch video of a violent stabbing has become an important test being watched around the world. What control can a nation state wield over big tech? I'm David Spears. Welcome to Insiders. Social media pylons are nothing new, but this time it's a political pylon being directed at a social media company itself. Twitter, or X as it's now known, is facing condemnation from all sides after insisting it should be allowed to show video of a violent stabbing in an Assyrian church. The platform's owner Elon Musk says this is a matter of free speech. The Prime Minister says he's an arrogant billionaire. The courts will now decide how much control Australia can exert. Security chiefs, meanwhile, are pleading with tech companies to help them crack terrorist and pedophile rings targeting young people on their platforms. Frustrations are growing and limits are being tested of what can be done to rein the platforms in.
The federal court has ordered Elon Musk's social media platform X to take down clips showing the stabbing of a Sydney bishop.
It is absurd for any one country to attempt to censor the entire world.
We'll do what's necessary to take on this arrogant billionaire.
Frankly, I think he's carrying on like a narcissistic cowboy.
If that bloke had half a social conscience or even 10% of one, that stuff would be pulled down. He hasn't pulled that down.
Australia backs the e-Safety Commissioner.
I'm not for the actions and the statements of our e-Safety Commissioner being ignored. We back her 100%.
We can't pretend that Australia can dictate to other countries around the world what people see within their countries.
We can't be the internet police for the whole world.
I think he's conflating issues and allegations of trying to control the internet globally. We're not trying to do that.
There's been a development on this legal battle in the federal court this afternoon.
The judge ordered a continuation of the 2-day injunction. Now, this is where we get into some peculiar territory because X so far hasn't complied with the original injunction.
The federal court has heard the bishop stabbed last week believes the video of the attack should remain online.
I would be of great concern if people use the attack on me to serve their own political interests, to control free speech.
Freedom of speech does not have anything to do with the sharing a video of someone being attacked in a church.
New South Wales and federal police have arrested 7 terror suspects. Police say they were intensely monitoring the youths after the stabbing of a bishop.
We identified links between the alleged offender and a network of associates and peers who we believe shared a similar violent extremist ideology.
There was no consultation with the community prior to these operations. This lack of transparency exacerbates the distress within our community.
We target radicalisation, not religion.
Our community seeks justice and equitable treatment. Thank you.
And my guest this morning is Di Lee, the independent member for Fowler in Sydney's West, where the alleged terrorist attack at the Assyrian church took place. First, let's check what's making news. The Sunday Age leads with the federal government ruling out a royal commission into domestic violence, saying the focus should instead be on implementing policies already identified. Thousands marched in Sydney, Hobart and Adelaide yesterday, calling for an end to violence against women. More rallies will be held in other cities today, including here in Canberra, which the Prime Minister will attend. Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles has visited Ukraine, where he's announced a further $100 million in Australian military support to help the war-ravaged nation. The money will go towards drones and short-range air defence systems.
We will continue to support Ukraine. This will not be the last announcement that we make. This is an enduring conflict, and we will stand with Ukraine for the long term until Ukraine is able to resolve this war on its terms.
The coalition's welcomed the funding, but says Australia should also send more coal shipments and retired Taipan helicopters to Ukraine. And finally, a couple of polls out this morning. News Corp papers have a Redbridge poll showing Labor's primary vote has fallen, but the Albanese government would be easily re-elected, leading the coalition 52 to 48% after preferences. A Resolve poll in the 9 newspapers shows the Prime Minister's plan to roll out more subsidies for local manufacturing under his future Made in Australia policy is winning early support. 42% back, putting taxpayer funds into making solar panels. Only 23% are opposed. Now, politicians on all sides have been laying into social media platforms. Indeed, some can't condemn them loudly enough. Their list of concerns is long. Boys viewing misogynistic content, terrorists and pedophiles hiding behind encrypted messaging apps, disinformation stoking community division, and the spread of extremist content. And yet, for all these concerns, most politicians can't bring themselves to quit social media. Instead, they're hoping to apply some rules of the road, but they're discovering it's not easy for one mid-sized country to take on the tech giants alone. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by Karen Middleton, Shane Wright and Bridget Brennan. Good to see you all. Let's start on this one, Karen. Twitter has previously taken down some content when asked to do so, but not this one. Is it clear why?
No, but it's interesting, isn't it? Elon Musk has decided to make a fight of this one. Weird that he chooses a violent video of this nature to dig in on, and he's inconsistent on these things. Like he's reluctant to make any criticism of countries like China. Maybe that's because he wants to sell his Tesla cars there. Yet he's happy to have a fight with a country like Australia. Is it because the e-safety commissioner used to work for Twitter? Who knows? And the other thing is, you know, he's making a free speech argument. He's trying to get the Australian people on board. He's trying to say, I'm on your side and your government isn't. So he's couching it in those terms. But you do wonder where he does draw the line on free speech. Like if we decided we wanted to publish his phone number, his home address, details of his kids, his credit card details, I reckon he might draw the line there. Yeah. Why is he not drawing the line with a clearly violent video that also potentially has a problem, causes a problem for our justice system into the future?
Well, he's taken issue with the order to take it down. Well, he has taken it down in Australia, but is challenging that. But then he's really taken an issue with the e-safety commissioner directing it be taken down globally as well. This is one of his tweets. He says, our concern here is that if any country is allowed to censor content for all countries, which is what the Australian e-safety commissar, he calls her, is demanding, then what's to stop any country from controlling the entire internet? Shane, does he have a point there?
He does have a point, because if and we can see it in China now, how they control the information that flows to their people. I think everyone in Australia would have a problem if the Chinese Communist Party was able to have a say over what we can see.
Or Russia or
Iran. There's a fair few countries that you could take a look at. But look, I go back to Karen's point. The fact that the share price for Tesla was $250 at the start of the year, US, and is now at $168. He has got financial pressures. Always follow money when it comes to some of these things. And in this space, I think historically...
How does this help him financially? Is it just about getting attention?
Getting attention and taking attention away from the problems that Tesla is facing because of Chinese competition for EVs.
Well, that's an interesting... And trust Shane Wright to have the theory that this is all driven by the share price of Tesla. But look, on this point of what global demands Australia can make, I mean, Peter Dutton made a similar point. Have a look at what he said.
I'd love to say that it could be taken down so that no kid across the world could watch it, but we strongly support the Commissioner's position in relation to taking it down so that Australians can't view it. But we can't pretend that Australia can dictate to other countries around the world what people see within their countries, as we wouldn't tolerate that here, that Russia could dictate what content is seen in Australia.
Yeah, and Bridge, maybe so, but is it unreasonable to ask these platforms to take down something like a violent stabbing attack?
No, it's a legitimate fight, and I think one that all Australians probably, well, the vast majority of Australians would back. I mean, we don't want
There are some free speech warriors who...
Yeah, post-pandemic, there's a few different views out there on, you know, the evils of government. But no, of course, it's a legitimate fight, and it's increasingly with our concern about particularly what young men are viewing online. I mean, no one wants our kids to be seeing these kinds of videos. but it's probably not a fight that we're going to win completely. There's going to have to be some sort of half measure where it sounds like there's going to still be the ability for people via a VPN to be able to go and seek these images online if that's what they want to do. I mean, I know the government's going to try its hardest to try and get it all removed. There's technical difficulties with asking the platforms to take the app down if it gets to that as well. But look, there's no reason why we can't have increased collaboration with allies, and we've got a lot of allies.
That's a good point.
To ask them to do what they can in their countries to take this material down.
Because we're not the only ones, battling the social media platforms on all sorts of fronts at the moment. I mean, this debate is running in the UK, in Canada, and many like-minded countries. The US have their own, I guess, First Amendment free speech.
Constitutionally enshrined free speech that makes it complicated.
Makes it a different debate there. But if we work together with other countries on this, are we likely to exert more influence over them?
Well, that seems to be the suggestion, collective action rather than a single country. I think
we saw that after Christchurch, didn't we? After the massacre there, this G20, and Scott Morrison was pushing then for much tougher rules on the social media platforms. Is something like that needed again now? Well,
maybe. I think other countries are watching Australia at the moment and saying, we'll just see how this goes with Australia and Elon Musk, rather than all getting in behind Australia officially, not publicly anyway.
Well, the Americans have their own fight with TikTok right at the moment, and trying to effectively ban TikTok. But you get into...
And to be clear, that's not a free speech
That's not free speech, that's a
about
security.
The Chinese ownership issue.
That's right, but they're very closely aligned. But you're running into the issue of tech companies who have got global reach coming up against sovereign states. And Elon Musk doesn't want to take responsibility for how his medium is used. And that's running up against the ability of a sovereign state, be it the UK, be it the US,
so here's the question.
Protect and look after their
Who's more
citizens.
powerful, the tech company or the nation state?
And this is the argument that the world is having right now, and has been having for the last 15 years or so, and it hasn't been resolved.
And they want to wield the power of a nation state, except they cross borders, but they don't want to be treated like a nation state in terms of sanctions, and that's the problem.
Look, in the meantime, I guess the easy thing to do is have a crack at Elon Musk. He's a pretty easy target to go after, and we've heard plenty of politicians doing that during the week, including the Prime Minister.
This is an egotist. He is someone who's totally out of touch with the values that Australian families have, and this is causing great distress.
But Bridge, the Prime Minister and plenty of other politicians won't leave Twitter themselves. Jackie Lambie did this week, but it hasn't exactly sparked a rush of people supporting it. Why do politicians still need to be on these platforms?
I don't know, David. I don't know whether they do need to still be on Twitter specifically. I mean, Twitter has, or X rather, has descended into become a very different platform to what it was, say, 5 years ago. I mean, look, there's really interesting discourse still on X. There's really interesting people still on X. Admittedly, I'm still on X because I tap into a lot of those really interesting thought leaders from around the world. But then there's a whole heap of nonsense and mess, and the algorithm is all over the place. So, and I don't really know it. Everyday Australians on X, I don't really know whether there's the argument that politicians need to be
a good question, isn't
putting their message out to voters via X. Although I do believe they do probably need to be on Instagram, on Facebook. Arguably, it's vexed, but arguably a lot of politicians probably should be on TikTok to be reaching young people.
This is where
people live. This is where a massive proportion, we saw this during the Voice debate, that TikTok was massively underestimated in terms of its reach, not just to younger Australians, but to older Australians as well. X, though, I don't really know how many people I know outside of journalism are actually using X.
Well, it's never had the reach of Facebook and Instagram and that, but it's where politicians and journos have...
Well, politicians go there because it's where people gather, as you say, and they want to be wherever people gather, but they're also then, because they're there, taking the feedback from that platform, and they can't tell whether someone is an 18-year-old over 18 and therefore a voter, whether they're Australian, whether they're even human. So they're taking all the feedback, but they don't know whether it's coming from people who are going to vote for them or not, or computers or people in dark rooms overseas who have an agenda that is nothing to do with what they're talking about. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I asked Peter Dutton about this on the show last week, and I've spoken to plenty of other pollies who make the same point. They don't spend personally a lot of time on it, but their officers put out things on Twitter. Anyway, look, I don't think there's any mood to... There is an ultimate power to ban Twitter that the e-safety commissioner, I think, has, but there's no mood on either side of politics to go that far.
Well, I think that people would object to that.
Yeah.
Australian people would object.
In the meantime, we also saw this week the heads of ASIO and the federal police addressing the National Press Club, rare event. This had actually been planned, as I understand it, before all the events in Sydney and this current debate over social media, but they too had social media in their sights.
Some of our children and other vulnerable people are being bewitched online by a cauldron of extremist poison on the open and dark web. And that's one serious problem. The other is that the very nature of social media allows that extremist poison to spray across the globe almost instantaneously.
So they want access to the encrypted messages that terrorists, pedophiles and others are sending on some of these platforms like WhatsApp and Signal and so on, but you know, they aren't getting much luck, nor are other countries as well. While they were giving that address, we saw a news break of the terror raids that took place in Sydney. 6 teenagers have now been charged with various terror offences. Look, this is going to play out before the courts, but it does suggest that this may have been, Karen, more than just one radicalised teenager being the problem.
Yeah, and this goes to the designation of it as a terrorist act. They designated it as a terrorist act early on, and they said there was information to suggest that that was warranted, and that is also about the intention to further a cause. And so there is a suggestion that there was more than one individual. These people have been charged with things like possessing extremist material, but also being part of a conspiracy to plan or carry out an attack, possession of a weapon, that sort of thing. So, you know, this is now forming a picture of perhaps more than an individual, allegedly, and that there may have been an intention that was greater than just one individual attacking another individual.
But the fact that they've been able to take action goes to the point, do they need more power? And the history of policing is an increase in power. You can see this feeds into the Elon Musk argument that you've got governments wanting more power to control your lives.
To look at encrypted
messages. And so, like, we've moved on from the days of like spooks hanging around the Communist Party or the New Guard in the 1930s going, oh, look, they've got these publications.
Get a photo of who's coming out.
Who's coming out. Yeah, you've moved on from that, but you can see that civil liberties argument, the liberty argument that Musk really pushes into about how much power is too much.
My colleague Paul Karp at the Press Club raised a point which I thought was a good one, that they do have powers of compulsion now about encryption, and they haven't used them. So they're wanting, the message from those two law enforcement leaders was, we want your cooperation to these big tech platforms more than we are getting, and not only in handing over material when we ask for it, but in ensuring your systems make that possible. And they're worried that Facebook, for example, is now introducing end-to-end encryption, but doing it in such a way that actually it won't be possible. And the criticism, and I think Reece Kershaw called it a disgrace, of Facebook was that it now would be able to, say, report to law enforcement, or somebody's sending worrying messages, but they won't be able to find out to whom.
Yeah.
So they haven't used their powers of compulsion. Well, that Mr. Kershaw said they now have used them once. So the message was, we don't want to force you, we want you to volunteer. But there was also a message that even when we force you, you still don't. Yeah. The technology is not allowing the access, and we need that to change.
It was an interesting exchange, which we might show you a little later on in the program. Time now, though, to talk to Independent MP Di Lee, who represents the seat of Fowler, where that church stabbing took place. As mentioned, peak Islamic groups are also critical of the police response. They say there's a lack of evidence pointing to a concrete threat or plan amongst the teenagers who've been charged, and they want the definition of terrorism revised.
The use of charged language, such as religiously motivated Sunni violent extremism by the Director General of ASIO, Mike Burgess, particularly during sensitive times, is not only reckless but also fuels Islamophobia and further marginalises the Muslim community. This approach undermines social cohesion and perpetuates the stigmatisation of an entire religious group based on the actions of a few.
Di Lee, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David.
Do you share the concerns of the Islamic community we heard there about police laying these terrorism charges?
When the Premier and the Police Commissioner came up with the the act. I question how quickly that decision was made, and was there enough consultation? At the end of the day, David, I understand that the law, police needed that extra powers that they need in order to get to the bottom of the problem and to find out who actually was behind, or if there's anyone behind what that 16-year-old boy did. And living in a very multi-faith, multicultural electorate like mine is so sensitive, and is a very difficult conversation that we must have, and I need to have with my community. I door knock, for instance, around Wakeley just this week for about Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. Went around there to check in with people, about 100 homes so far. And a lot of people were shocked by what happened that night. But at the end of the day, because they live in such a multicultural and cohesive and social cohesive, electorate, they did not want that destroyed. We had, people of refugee background living there, people who, new arrivals from Middle East who escape terrorism as well. They are living side by side. So when we talk about, a terror act, we just need to be aware of how that language lands in a community like Fowler and in other areas where there's multi-faith and multicultural communities live side by side.
So you are satisfied now with how police have handled this?
I wouldn't say satisfied, David. When police have a lot of power, you are very still concerned. You hope that they're using their power responsibly, and they do it in a way that will ensure that our community still feels safe, and ensure that there is that connection between police and a multicultural community like ours, and that is police are not going to, in the future, abuse any of those extra powers that they have been given.
And you're saying that's what's happened here. Why are you not satisfied with police?
I'm not saying I'm not satisfied. I'm not saying I'm satisfied. I'm saying I'm watching and waiting to see the outcome of the investigation. I'm saying that I would like... Look, the police in our area have had challenges working and connecting with especially the young people in our community. And over the decades, we've had Vietnamese refugee kids from Vietnam, and now we have kids from Iraq and all that are feeling very much disconnected from society in the first place, feeling like they don't belong in the first place, feeling that they can't even connect with their own parents and in the home because they're growing up here. So there's all of these challenges that a community that we have in Fowler. But what we need to understand is that what are some of the work that's being done to ensure that people are feeling like they belong, that we've got so much uncertainties out there in the world currently. How do they feel safe, secure in terms of financial safety, food safety? All of that are the challenges that our communities in Fowler are facing.
I understand. But just as a leader in the community, I'm just trying to be clear on where you stand. You did initially criticise police for labelling it a terrorist incident. Were you too quick to criticise?
I think I wasn't criticising. I questioned how did they come to that conclusion so quickly. And I think subsequently I did say, look, if that means it gives them the power to get to the bottom of this and find out who actually was behind it, if there are people behind it, and ensuring that we make people feel as safe as quickly as possible, because many of our communities who've escaped, tyrannical regimes are here feeling like, with that word, what it brings on is that people are feeling, oh my God, terror has followed us now. And that will actually make people live on edge. And following what happened in Bondi, people are feeling, oh my God, this is now going to happen in our community.
And should police, you're saying police should be weighing that sort of flow-on community reaction before they call something terrorism or charge someone with terrorism?
I think they need to be very, and I'm sure that they are experts in this area in terms of expert in terrorism, experts in all those criminal activities. I hope that they know what they're doing when they label a criminal act with such a label, and that they will reassure our community as soon as possible to ensure that people who have escaped terrorism from the Middle East, that they feel that they're safe here, that there's no such thing happening here.
Yeah. What about the call from peak Islamic groups for a revision of terrorism laws to eliminate the classification of religiously motivated terrorism from the definition? Would you support that?
Look, I think we cannot deny that we are living in a world where, there are incidents of terrorism, more than incident across the world, and that what happened just recently is a terrifying act. It's in a church. It's in a place of worship. So you can actually understand why people are terrified by that act. However, I think we need to be ensuring that that doesn't actually get sprayed right across the community. Those who are, the Muslim faith doesn't feel that they're being targeted. So how do we ensure that we are really addressing the problem that happened in the church, and making sure that the young boy who did it, allegedly attacked, the bishop, that it was a lone action, or was it a group of people? We need to make sure that people believe the government is actually protecting us.
Understand that, but would you support changing the definition of terrorism, is the question here?
Oh, David, I'm not an expert in terrorism. I mean, I need to leave that with the, people who are in that field. But we need to include people from the community to engage with them, to get information, consult with them, because are those in the ASIO, do we have people of expertise who have different faith, a different cultural background and different lived experience giving that advice within that space? Or are they making the decision from a group of people who are, I have to say, who are mainly, Anglo-Celtic, and making that decision and bringing it out there? Are there different cultural groups within that expertise that are giving our police that advice? So we need to ensure that people are included.
Awareness. Are you saying that they lack cultural awareness?
Well, I hope that they don't lack cultural awareness, because we're living in a very multicultural community. So therefore, in terms of giving expert opinions, that they have those included, those who come from those lived experiences, cultural background, giving them that expert advice as well.
Let me ask you, you've spoken about the suffering of the Islamic community in your electorate, particularly those with family members in Gaza. Where do you stand on this? Do you support a ceasefire in Gaza?
Oh, absolutely. I think I was probably, the first person to call for a ceasefire. I think that, through my door knock, a couple of women have said to me they said, it doesn't matter. Let's talk about, put aside religious beliefs. Seeing a child being killed, seeing women, innocent people being killed, it's just not something that people can actually, take. It's very emotional for people, and for me as a person who escaped Vietnam and being a child who ran from the war, I can't. It's very traumatic for me. And very traumatic for people in my community. And are you saying a ceasefire conditional on hostages being released, or are you just saying... Look, absolutely. I think hostages should be released. I mean, where is the international community in trying to play a role in making sure that the hostages are released? Why haven't they been released? I don't understand it. Why has this thing continued on for so long? Where has the international community's leaders failed in release and getting those hostages released? I don't get it.
And should Australia recognise a Palestinian state, regardless of a negotiated settlement with Israel?
I'm not a Middle East expert, David, but I think
you are a
Parliament,
representative of people with very strong views on this.
In Parliament, we have called for a two-state solutions, and I think that's not just us, but it's been for decades now. I mean, Yitzhak Rabin, who got assassinated, called for, asked for a two-state solution as well. So I think that everybody is, from my understanding, would like a two-state solutions.
All right. Just coming back to the events at Wakeley, do you think the video of the stabbing should be removed globally from the Twitter platform?
What I can say is that if we're talking about violence, we're seeing violence, increased violence in society, we see increased violence against women, and we wonder why. I think the content on social media, and I think that we need to make sure that our young people in particular are not exposed to this kind of violent content constantly, because that is actually influencing them, in particular in this day and age whereby people are feeling so disconnected from their own communities. So I think that I support for that kind of violent content not to be continually shared so much that it influence. I mean, we don't even, you know, we have laws around bestiality and pornography. That's not being shared. Like, honestly, how can we not stop images of violence? Because that is having a huge impact. And we question why there's such a huge increase in violence against women or violence in society, you know. So we need to think about, and Australia should take a stand on that. Now, however, I have to understand that people don't like government controlling content, controlling them, and government has to build a social license now, because there's a lot of mistrust between the people and the government has to really do something to rebuild that trust and build a social license in order for them to take actions in situations like this.
You mentioned violence against women. Would you support a federal royal commission?
I don't know if another Royal Commission would actually, do any good. I think what I think government needs to do is actually getting the funding and targeted that to communities that really are experiencing high domestic violence, and getting it implemented, getting programs, getting education, getting and making sure that we don't alienate one group from another. I mean, I'm a mother of a son. I know that we've got to be mindful of our language, because not all men are violent, but how we are portraying it is that men are violent against women. And how do we include the young men in our society? How do we make sure that they're educated to respect and to work alongside women? And we don't feel like we're kind of saying that they're the bad ones there. You know, what kind of language are we sending out there to young men growing up in this day and age? Targeted program, education, ensure that young boys and young girls work together to know that they respect one another as human beings.
Just a final one, Di Lee. It's reported you had dinner with Peter Dutton the other night in your electorate. Did you talk about what might happen in the event of a hung parliament after the next election?
No, look, the opposition leader reached out following the Wakely incident and, asked us to come, to dinner just to check in, to see what any issues that are important in our community. And, I think he's the only one that reached out and come out to see us, and
So the PM hasn't
I'm very
been out
grateful. He has been out there previously, but in different scenarios. But this time he specifically, rang me up and asked me to come along to see how I was going, and it was very stressful, David. You don't realise how traumatic the whole thing has been for me and for my community in the last few weeks. Talking about trauma, and I still feel it talking to you. It's not something, and unless you live in that community and feel our community, you don't know how challenging it has been for us mentally and emotionally.
Well, our thoughts are with your community. Di Lee, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
All right, coming up, we're going to look at the inflation figures that came out the other day, what all that means for interest rates and the budget just over a couple of weeks away. First, let's continue this conversation back to our panel, Karen Middleton, Shane Wright and Bridget Brennan. Look, let's talk about male violence, violence against women, and we know the rallies that took place yesterday, more will take place this afternoon. The PM will attend the one in Canberra that's going to happen this afternoon. Look, I guess, Karen, it's no wonder this has really exploded again as an issue after what happened at Bondi Junction, the women killed there, and after 2 women were killed this week, one in regional New South Wales, one in regional Victoria. This has really escalated a lot of tension on this.
Yes, it's become another moment, and there are groups in the community that are organising these rallies to take the opportunity to send a message about the need not only for long-term change, attitudinal change, and that's, it's one of these intransigent issues that really change needs to start when people are children, and about how women and men are interacting, about respect and about the casual lack of respect that continues throughout a lifetime, but also immediate change, support for services to support women in danger, women's refugees. There's money required and assistance required immediately. So those are the two messages. And I think it's interesting that senior members of government are now seeking to make it clear that they're attending these rallies. I think they don't want this to be seen as a rally against the government. So they're coming to these rallies to say, we agree with you, we support these ambitions. They don't want it to be, we're having a crack at the government, and I think that's probably partly why they're wanting to show up, not only because they do endorse the sentiment, but to not have that separation, us and them thing.
Is that enough, do you think, Bridget?
Is it enough that they're attending rallies?
Well, they're saying that this is something that has a shared responsibility, society needs to change, or does government need to do more?
I don't fully think that they've met the moment, and I appreciate that they're attending the rallies today, which is really welcome. It's a wonderful step from the Prime Minister. He put a short statement out this weekend, again, really welcome, that he's sensing the level of distress, anger and grief in the community that Australian women are feeling right now. But I think they've been a little bit slow, and that's been the analysis from a lot of leaders in domestic and family and sexual violence that we have in Australia, that there's been this push for a long time, for years back actually. I mean, the scale of the violence we're seeing this year is horrendous. It's unacceptable.
One woman every 4 days.
Yes, at the moment it is, and multiple women killed in April alone. But as you know, I investigated the deaths and the disappearances of Aboriginal women coming up to 2 years ago. We asked the Prime Minister on that program at the time, and he didn't have time to speak to us then. So he might have been busy, but we were actually trying to get federal ministers to look at this issue even back then, 18 months ago, and this has been a crisis all the way back since when Rosie Batty was talking about this 10 years ago. I mean, we can't say that we didn't know. We've known that this is one of the most serious crises we have to grapple with as Australian women and as a society. We hear from ministers that there needs to be increased levels of respect towards women, and that men need to own that. Now, of course that is true. Of course that is true. But I think the level of anger that we're seeing from Australian women, and there's a massive movement online, David, from young Australian, particularly from young victim survivors who are leading this movement, who are leading the rallies this weekend. What they're saying is we also need to acknowledge that there's so many women in danger right now. So it needs to, the prevention work that's really essential needs to be, as Karen said, coupled with some sort of collaboration from all the experts. I don't know whether a National Royal Commission is the answer on the repeat offenders, on men who go in and out of court and then end up murdering women in extremely violent circumstances. There needs to be Aboriginal women at the table, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women at the table immediately, because there are so many Aboriginal women in danger currently. We need to be listening to what's coming out from the Senate inquiry into missing and murdered women that's going on right now. And we have some of the world leading experts in gendered violence in this country, and it seems to be that there's this call for the government to, obviously states and territories own this issue from a legislative and from a law enforcement perspective, but women are saying we want the Prime Minister to be leading this, to be talking about this. And I'll stop soon, but I'm really passionate about this.
This is good
and
stuff.
We need journalists to start asking questions at every single press conference and to be owning this. We need the press gallery, we need all presenters and journalists who are working in this country to grapple with this issue. It can't be that we just see these deaths of women as individual moments in time. If we're going to get big breaking news alerts for terrorism incidents, I think there's a legitimate discussion to be had about the way that we label these incidents.
And we've seen a bit of that this week. You know, I mean, the Sydney Morning Herald certainly went really hard on the Molly Ticehurst killing. There will be a National Cabinet meeting, a virtual one as I understand it, specifically on this issue. They're just working out when that can happen. But the line, Shane, from the federal government is we don't need another Royal Commission. We've seen them at the state level. New South Wales is looking at one. Maybe they'll do one. But we're already 2 years into a 10-year plan that has record funding to tackle domestic and family violence. Do you think, though, the pressure will grow for more?
There's always pressure for more. the last month and a half has amplified it, but you get into the issue, and Bridget's absolutely passionate about it, absolutely understandable, but you're talking about a societal change. How do you change society? And so much of this is at the societal level. It is at the boys and men level. And history is resplendent with failures. And I get, like, racism is one of the worst examples of that. And how we, as a society, trying to change attitudes from young to old is extremely difficult. And, like, you can throw money at it. I think Bridget's absolutely correct, asking questions constantly about it.
Difficult conversations also, Shane, need to be had about women's experience with the justice system, because we know for a fact that multiple women go to police forces and are often turned away for help. So it's not that women don't know that they need to go and get help, because they do. And that's a difficult conversation, because typically governments do not want to stand alongside police forces and say you're not doing the right thing. But in many cases, commissions of inquiry and inquests have found that women have been told to go away, or their responses have been really inadequate. And that's a difficult conversation for governments to have, but I do think it does need to be led from the federal level about why so many Australian women, either won't go to police because they don't think they will get help, and that they look at the justice system and think, why would I bother? And then we hear from the women who've been set on fire, run over, stabbed multiple times, beaten and killed, that they tried to get help before they died. Now, that's a real issue that does need federal leadership.
And to the point, David, about this elevating the status of violence against women alongside other kinds of issues like terrorism. It was interesting at the press club this week, the Director General of ASIO did confirm that incel, people in the involuntary celibate movement, misogyny, can be designated as terrorism, does fit the definition because that is an ideology. But then Commissioner Kershaw made the point that the difference here is it's the intent of the perpetrator. The perpetrator, to fit the definition, has to intend to be furthering a cause. And the problem is, oftentimes these events do further a cause like that, but if there's not evidence that the intent was there, that it was an act targeting an individual and not an act to further a cause, it falls short of the definition. Now, a lot of people will wrestle with that and say, well, hang on, it keeps happening, why can't we elevate it? But that is the definitional issue that we're getting trapped in. That's why it doesn't get designated the way other violence does.
And look, we've got to move on, but if these issues have raised any concerns for you and you need support, the 24-hour National Sexual Assault, Family and Domestic Violence Counselling line is there, 1800-RESPECT, 1800-737-732. Look, let's just turn to the economy because we saw an inflation number the other day there's prompted a lot of, I guess, head scratching and rethinking about what's going to happen with interest rates. We'd all been expecting them to come down sometime later this year, but now various economists are saying they're going to go up instead. Here's what the inflation number showed. The red line's the annual inflation rate. It looks okay. It's coming down from the peak, and look, it is still tracking, I think, just below the forecast at 3.6 now. But that blue line on the bottom is the quarterly number, and you can see that in the first 3 months of this year, that last quarter, it went up, Shane. It went up to 1%.
Yeah.
What does it mean? Should we be worried about a rate rise?
3 months ago, the inflation came in 0.2 of a percentage point under what the market was expecting. This week it came 0.2 over what the market was expecting. So at the end of the day, over 6 months, we're exactly where we were supposed to be. But you're right. There are plenty of people saying we need higher interest rates. But if I was to tell you that, say, a third of the inflation in the last quarter was due to education. And
so school fees.
School fees, another 20% of it was coming from changes around medicines. So at the start of the year, the Medicare safety net resets, and so does PBS subsidies. There's half the inflation in that one quarter was in an area which is not demand driven. And then the other big issue that we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years is what's going on in insurance. And that is a climate change issue, and people don't want to talk about it, but we have seen a huge increase.
Well, if we had a graph for insurance prices, it'd be the hockey stick. But look, we'll see what happens with interest rates. I don't think anyone's expecting we'll necessarily see a cut anytime soon as a result of all of this. But what does it mean for the budget? This does complicate the...
Inflation's good for budget.
Well, it helps.
I know a couple of treasurers have disagreed with me on this because they don't want to talk about that, but it pushes up some of their revenues. And Jim Chalmers is going to present another surplus when he comes to the budget in a fortnight's time. There's only been 4 governments that have had successive budget surpluses in the past 50 years. One of them was Frank Crean, of all people, back in the early 70s. Peter Costello and
now Jim Chalmers.
Look,
but as to what he does in terms of spending, giving people help with cost of living, or reining in spending to tackle inflation, here's what he said.
We will be very focused on this inflation challenge. We'll be focused on the cost of living and housing. We think we can do that at the same time as we make key investments in the foundations of future growth in our economy.
Yeah, so Karen, tackle inflation means pulling the brake, but making investments in growth and helping people with cost of living usually means spending a bit.
Well, they're trying to kind of go around to the side. They don't want to do direct spending because the dilemma they have is, you know, the price of everything's going up. Anyone who's been in a supermarket in the last few weeks knows that that's contributing to it as well. So people need help to meet that challenge, but the more help directly the government gives them, the worse that price increase gets. So they've got that dilemma they have to try and resolve, and Jim Chalmers is trying to balance those things out. I think there's an expectation and pressure on the government to do something. I mean, we've heard the suggestion they might do something about HECS, for example, for the student loans, that will help students out. But there are plenty of other people demanding some kind of...
Well, for example, the government's own Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee, which has been up and running for the last couple of years. It's chaired by the former Labor Minister Jenny Macklin. Had a chat with her. They've made their recommendations, and she says, look, you got to, yes, they increased job seeker and rent assistance last year, but it needs to happen again. They're not being prescriptive about the dollar amount, but she says, you know, these most vulnerable people are struggling just as much as they were.
But I think they do want a timeline, though. They're asking for a timeline for an increase. They want a commitment from the government when they will do it. So
yeah, I think they're saying roughly $17 additional a day just to keep people.
They'd like to get to 90% of the age pension for job seeker, but what are the chances, do you think, of the government? I mean, they gave, a $40 a fortnight increase last year to job seeker.
Well, they poured cold water on it pretty much immediately. This is a committee that, you know, they didn't really want to set up. They set this committee up because David Pocock insisted on it in the Senate as a condition of supporting industrial relations reforms. So, and it involves people that are friends of this government as well as people who've been critics of this government. So this is a substantial piece of work. Like this
makes it harder for them to say no.
This work should not be pushed aside. It is important and it's interesting. But unfortunately, in the current climate, I suspect the government will say, we like what you've done, but we can't do that particular measure.
The other thing they want to do, and the Prime Minister made this clear a couple of weeks ago in his big pre-budget speech, this Future Made in Australia plan, this is the future investment in growth that you hear the Treasurer talk about there, subsidising, incentivising local manufacturing of things like batteries and solar panels. It's still not winning over a lot of economists, including the Productivity Commissioner Danielle Wood. She remains unconvinced about this. I had a chat with her for the podcast this week, and in particular, even the already announced $1 billion subsidy that the government's put on the table for local solar panel manufacturing in Australia. Yeah, she's concerned.
If an Australian solar panel manufacturer is internationally competitive, that's fantastic. You know, go out there and do that. But the question is, should we be using government money to support that? And, you know, it's not clear to me in that particular case that the case has been made.
Yeah, that's one they've already announced. You can have a listen to or watch that conversation there. The QR codes are on your screen. Anyway, we'll see more details around all of that.
It is interesting because people have talking about this without seeing the detail. Like Danielle Wood is effectively in the Ricardian comparative advantage world of, like, if we can't produce it, then somebody else should. But should you be the economic and the political should be allowing the Chinese Communist Party to be in charge of a huge source of potential energy, which may be pivotal to climate change.
It's all about the vibe, isn't it? It sounds nice to be making things in Australia.
And it's bringing that economic security argument and national security.
It is really interesting how that language has changed.
Yeah. All right, look, final one. The Prime Minister joined his Papua New Guinean counterpart, James Marape, for a couple of days leading up to Anzac Day this week on the Kokoda track. This was fascinating. And it cleverly ticked a few boxes, I suppose, of, honouring the sacrifice of those who fought and died on the track, but also highlighting their tight bond at a time when China's obviously trying to draw the region closer to its orbit, and it also gave them a good workout over a couple of days as well. The ABC's National Affairs editor, Mel Clark, was one of a small group of journalists who joined them on the track and spent a lot of quality time camping, chatting, hiking with the two leaders over those 2 days. Mel, great to see you. I'm really fascinated by this. It's a really rare thing to see two leaders spend that amount of time together and physically pushing themselves. What were your observations?
Look, it was certainly hiking together and sweating together for 2 days. Look, there was genuine rapport between Anthony Albanese and James Marape, you know, whether it was when they were walking or whether it was at the end of the day at the campsite having a chat. They were very relaxed and jovial in conversation. You know, one could pick up where the other left off, which I think is a sign of how clearly they can anticipate what each other think about various topics. They were, look, both very challenged by the walk, especially Anthony Albanese, but to be fair, it was a very hot and very humid environment, which is pretty much the exact opposite of Canberra weather right now. But through that hardship of doing this walk, they seem quite proud of having done something quite unprecedented as sitting Prime Ministers.
Yeah, I did it years ago, and it certainly is challenging the Kokoda track. Mel, in terms of what you learnt chatting with them over those couple of days about their regional outlook, we have a pretty good idea of Anthony Albanese's, but is it similar to Prime Minister Marape's?
Look, there's absolutely a sense of a shared mission here, and you know, as you said at the start, while the trek was ostensibly about honouring those who fought on the Kokoda track, really here both leaders were wanting to project the unity of the past between the two countries as something that continues into the future, and that comes at a time when countries, particularly China, are jostling for influence in the region. This is how Anthony Albanese described it to me.
I think it sends a message to both countries, but also to the region, that we're in step. We literally are walking side by side towards the future.
So the key bit there is that this is a message to the region. This was really a display of the extent of the relationship. And we know James Marape believes this too. You know, chatting one night over dinner, he was describing the shared language, shared culture and shared values of both countries as making the Australian-Papua New Guinean relationship distinctly different from PNG's relationship with Asia, where language, culture and values are different. This is how he was describing it. He wasn't suggesting relations with Asian nations were difficult or undesirable, quite the opposite. He sees a big role for China in economic development, but he was clear that Australians and Papua New Guineans had a natural kinship and very much a shared home.
Yeah, what an amazing experience. Mel Clark, thanks so much for that, and well done. And Shane, as you would know, marathon runner Mel Clark probably wouldn't have cracked a sweat on that track at all.
She would have done it without any trouble at all.
Exactly. But it is fascinating to see them do this. And you wonder how it would have been viewed from others in the region, particularly China.
Well, the Foreign Minister of China, Wang Yi, was just in Papua New Guinea talking about trade and other matters, and there is concern about Papua New Guinea getting closer to China. We've seen Australia be concerned right around the region about individual countries, the Solomons in particular, forging closer ties with China. So even though they call this soft diplomacy, there's a very sharp edge underneath it. Relationships between leaders do matter. Personal rapport does matter, because you can pick up the phone and talk to a leader and persuade and put a case much more easily.
Remember that time I fell over in the creek?
Yeah, exactly. We had a shared experience. So there's a very serious intent under this, which is not only about Australia's diplomatic relations with PNG, but it's also about expressing our desire to ensure that China doesn't get a greater foothold around the region.
Xi Jinping is not going to go walking with James Marape over the picnic anytime soon.
I think so. All right, our panel, Bridget Brennan, Shane Wright and Karen Middleton, will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with Lewis Hobba, comedian and host of the Hobba and Hing podcast, and a very warm welcome back.
A pleasure to be here, Mike.
And we've put on a special degree of miserable just for you.
Let's dive in.
If you're looking for anti-social media, it seems like X marks the spot. And what a week. Like, the debate's been raging.
It has. It's really interesting. It's certainly a bit of a murky issue. And this is a great one.
It is a great one. Mark Knight, Elon saying social media to the rescue. He seems to be using an accelerant.
Yes.
Yeah, and on the bonfire of insanity.
Yeah, and he, as an electric car maker, hates fuel, so that must really hurt him.
That must hurt.
Yeah.
Beautiful David Rowe. He's got the E-Safety Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, here, applying what must be called the Musk mask to silence him.
It's always nice when the Australian politicians stand up to international billionaires.
Yeah.
Because they never do it to our own.
No, that's right. Elon himself tweeted this, which is... it's kind of a very complicated meme.
This is one of the least funny things I've ever seen on the internet.
Yeah. Don't take my word for it, just ask the Australian PM. He's got the crossroads here, which looks very much like an X, I think, and free speech and truth on one side, censorship and propaganda the other, with the social media giants up here. He must have sacked all the meme specialists at X.
That's right, he sacked everyone else.
Yeah. Beautiful Cathy Wilcox, who seems to have the toxic stew of playing on X well down here, with a lot of fairly serious characters playing in the what can only be described as a lot of brown stuff.
I'm interested that you called it stew. That was not my first thought when I saw the brown pipe.
No.
I thought it was something much more excremental.
Yeah, well...
I'm starting to wonder if maybe social media just isn't for us.
It's just not fun.
No, it's just not that fun.
Matt Golding, he's got X here as X-rated.
That one, I could see Elon Musk actually using that as his real logo.
Yeah.
I could see him loving that.
This beautiful Dean Alston, who's he's got Elon here as a bird of paradise. See what I did there?
I did. It's really good.
Yeah, splat with the ooh.
Yeah. I was reading, actually, there was another article about how Albo they hadn't planned anywhere for him to take a poo while he was on the Kokoda track.
Really?
And they thought it could be a very bonding experience for him and the leader of Papua New Guinea as well. So
Lewis,
it's been a big week of poo.
You have just inserted this visual image in my head that I'm going to have real trouble getting rid of.
You're a photographer at large, Mike. Get out there, get on the track, get the snap. You could sell that thing for millions. Wouldn't have to do this anymore.
Lewis, Anzac Day is the time, of course, when we all reflect on the meaning of war and Australia's participation in the many wars that we've been in. And cartoonists are no exception, of course. Beautiful Mark Knight walking Kokoda then and now. And Marape here helping the Prime Minister. He had a bit of a slip there at one point.
Yes.
Needed to be helped.
Yes.
Yeah.
A little a flesh wound of the opinion polls.
Yeah. You got to watch those opinion polls. They can be quite wounding. Harry Bruce has got Lest We Forget, and on the horizon here we have Ukraine and Gaza as the ghost digger here is looking
onto the
impending doom.
Future memorials.
Yeah. I thought this was the strongest cartoon of the week. Cathy Wilcox, of course. Lest We Forget, men and women who gave their lives for their country.
Women who lost their lives because men got angry.
Yeah.
It's amazing from Cathy.
Lewis, it's been a great pleasure seeing you at least, but some of the subject matter, not so much, but I'll let you do the honours.
Bring me back next time when it's not Anzac Day. There's no wars and no angry billionaires.
It's a deal.
Thank you so much. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. Bridget.
The Yoorrook Justice Commission in Victoria is Australia's first truth-telling inquiry. It's been hearing really strong evidence from Aboriginal people across Victoria about human rights abuses perpetrated since colonisation. And tomorrow, for an Australian first, a leader of a government in Jacinta Allen will give evidence at the Commission. So, tune in because it's a really important moment. I've got an interview with her tonight on the news.
That'll be interesting to watch.
And tomorrow on News Becky as well.
Excellent. Shane.
Next, economic political debate is around non-compete clauses. The US over this week banned them. Now, we had a case earlier this year of a 17-year-old woman who was harassed at her dance instructing studio, found herself, she couldn't go to work at another place for the next 3 years within a 15-kilometre distance of the studio that she used to work for, and that studio owned multiple studios. This is a real issue around productivity, and I think you're going to see the federal government go very close to considering a ban on something that affects about 20% of the population, a third of people in real estate and financial services. This is a big economic fight coming down the line.
That's a good one. Karen.
There was a moment during the Burgess-Kershaw address at the Press Club which was fascinating and terrifying when Commissioner Kershaw produced 4 pictures of children and asked people which one was created by artificial intelligence, the point being they all were. He said the problem for law enforcement is that child pornography is now being developed very sophisticated way without any human beings in it, and they are using resources looking for victims that don't exist. Terrible problem. but extrapolate what a massive problem AI is becoming for us,
Terrifying.
what chaos it'll cause in our country if you start seeing videos of, say, public figures doing things they never did, our partners doing things they never did. That's a way to cause chaos. There's a special Senate Select Committee looking at the whole issue of AI, reporting in September. It's going to be a fascinating report.
Sure is. Thank you all for joining us this morning. A really interesting chat. Now, finally, speaking of that Press Club address, a shout out to The Guardian's Paul Karp for both his question and his live fact-checking of the Federal Police Commissioner's maths during that address on Wednesday. He asked why the AFP had not yet used its powers to compel tech companies to provide access to encrypted messages, and he drew a head-scratching answer. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Why are you asking the tech companies for more cooperation instead of escalating and using the powers that you already have to compel it?
I think you'll see in this financial year a 100% increase on that zero.
But 100% of zero is zero, so excuse me for being obtuse.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.